you take somebody that's trying to move into that powerlifting and you go 3 weeks box, 3 weeks box, 3 weeks box, 3 weeks box, and then you throw them back into the free squat, they have no idea what to do. They don't know where depth is. They don't know where anything else is.
When you're programming, how do you go about phasing in the box versus doing a free squat? Because I feel like I've heard sometimes that the box squat is almost not geared towards like equipped lifters, because like at the bottom of the squat, the suit kind of does a little bit of the work. So how do you go about programming it for either geared or non-geared or just phasing?
Yeah,
how do you go about that?
I get where that comes from and why people say that, but it's a very, that reason doesn't hold a whole lot of weight with me, the whole geared thing. It's just the most convenient to be able to say. Box squats don't work because Louis is the one that kind of popularized those, and he's in all gear. So it's just like a whitewash type of thing, where it's kind of a bullshit excuse, where the validation I have on that is the time period that I was in there, we just used one single ply briefs that didn't do shit. So we didn't use that. Aside, there's still a lot of strength coaches and everybody else that have used the box squat forever from that time period, but that doesn't answer the question. It's just, I'm going to get into the cons of squatting to a box and box squatting. And that's definitely one of those that comes out there, but that's kind of like one of the shittiest ones that people can throw out, is it only works for geared lifters, which is kind of fucking stupid. But so how to program it, that's the better question there, where obviously it's always going to depend upon the situation. So if you're trying to change somebody's squat form, and if it's a beginner, so when I was working with Gen Pop people and it's a complete beginner, I'm probably putting them in a box to begin with, because they don't know how to squat without looking like, knees all over the place and just rounding. Everybody knows how to sit in a chair and stand up, to sit on a toilet and stand up. So I'll start them just with the movement mechanics of sitting on a box and standing back up. This would not be the box squat where they're super wide and sitting back, just squatting to the box. I'll teach them there just to be able to teach their body mechanics and to make sure that they're applying force with both feet to stand back up. That's where I'll start, and I'll probably stay with that until they can do a free squat and not look like a complete mess. This would be a young athlete as well, junior high or whatever, and it's going to be a pretty fast transition. Now, if you're dealing with somebody that's got a bodybuilding background or a different background, and you want to, when they're coming from that bodybuilding background, or they haven't done a lot of training that involves singles and triples, they do not know how to use a lot of force. They don't know that explosive strength component very well. So I would start with making sure the form's good, right? You got to make sure that they got to have some semblance of decent form first, unless it's that radical beginner that I talked about first. And then you look at what that is, and then you see where the issues are with that. If they don't have that, then you got to use 3 to 6 weeks of just reinforcing whatever their technique is there to be able to get that. And then when you can start to see that there's breakdowns here, they don't know how to explode up, then you'll throw the box in. Now, when you throw the box in, box height's going to be another segue here I'll go into in a minute. Then you're going to use the same form that they have, just have them sit on the box, maintains a certain degree of tightness, so they're not just folding over and they're not crashing down the box. So they're sitting down the box with control, sitting with tightness, and then standing up with more explosive force, right? That's the only goal of that first 3-week wave, is to be able to get them to stand up with force, to sit, pause, flex as hard as they possibly can. Most cases that can be achieved sometime within that first 3 weeks, as long as the load isn't stupid, ridiculously high, right? If that's achieved within the first 3 weeks, then I would go back to the free squat to see if what you just changed is going to hold. So when you go back to the free squat after that, you can I would probably put a pause squat somewhere in there to be able to see, can they squat down to that consistent depth, pause, and explode back up from there. And if they can't do that, then just remove the pause squat, filter through that same cycle again, and then go back to the box the next 3 weeks. If you take somebody, from what I've heard and what I've seen, if you take somebody that's, you're trying to move into that powerlifting and you go 3 weeks box, 3 weeks box, 3 weeks box, 3 weeks box, and then you throw them back into the free squat, they're fucked. They have no idea what to do. They don't know where depth is. They don't know where anything else is. So you got to be kind of strategic on how you put it in there, realizing that the goal is they have to be able to do the free squat with better technique, with the straight bar path on the way up, and with explosive strength. So you got to kind of weave back and forth through that. That's the easiest way I can explain the programming in there with that. And then the closer somebody gets to a meet, the more you probably want to get away from the box. The box can come in on secondary days. It can come in for accessory exercise, or the box squat can come in just to be able to work the hamstrings. But the hamstrings and glutes are starting to become a weakness again. So it's starting to reemerge. It hasn't been as big of a weakness over the past 5 or 6 years as it has been in the past. I don't know why. I think it's because people are deadlifting more, and they're doing RDLs more. There's something in there that's kind of creating that reason for it. So that's how I kind of put it in there. Now, when we're speaking to the coaches, the football strength and conditioning coaches, they're not that worried about what somebody's true full squat is. They're just worried about the performance that's going to be on the field. So, and they're also getting deep squats with other movements in the program, which I should probably bring that up, where if they're box squatting on one day, there's probably going to be a goblet squat or a front squat or something that's a free squat on a different day. Where the other, I guess I'm talking about some of the disadvantages here. The other disadvantage of somebody that's box squatting all the time is their bottom end can begin to suffer, especially when you take the box away, because they're not doing anything without the box, right? And a lot of times with the strength coaches as well, the boxes that they're using are going to be a little bit higher than parallel. Usually 1 to 2 inches higher than parallel is pretty much where all of them fall. And that's because they're looking for that explosive pop out of the bottom. That explosive pop out of the bottom is a lot easier to get to happen or to achieve when the box is a little bit higher. You put somebody on a lower box, that's not easier to achieve. What they're worried about is that first step, that first explosive strength component when they're on the field or jumping or whatever the hell they're going to do. So that's why they default to the higher box. And that's why a lot of them will say they only want to use the high box, but then they get bashed because they're squatting high, right? But that's what they're looking for, is the adaptation of doing that. In their program, they have other stuff to where people are squatting low to be able to take care of that. Now, the disadvantage there, usually where a lot of that criticism comes from, is going to be people that are training for hypertrophy or the bodybuilding sector and so forth, where a high box is probably going to suck for hypertrophy, right? You don't have the full range of motion. You don't have what a loaded stretch or whatever it's going to be. It's going to suck. Where if you wanted to put in high box squats for hypertrophy, you're going to need to do like 15 or 20 reps and just basically just kill yourself. And that will help in that regard, because as you get closer to failure, you can sit down, pause for a second and come back up. So you're getting like a micro rest to be able to push that set even harder. And you're not going to be able to get that if you were doing a free squat, right? So there are ways, right? But yes, it's probably not the best thing for hypertrophy. So a lot of the criticisms that you'll see with the squatting to a box or a box squat is basically because there's lack of context, because you don't see how the whole thing's being implemented into that thing. Some of the other disadvantages of the box squat is you can't have people just fucking crashing down on the box, which everybody should know this, because the spinal compression is going to be what they're going to say is you're going to sit down in there, the spine's going to compress, and that's just, it's not a good thing. It's not a good look. It's not good for the spine, Well, just don't drop the fuck down, sit down with control, pause, come back up. So that kind of alleviates that one. But in a lot of cases, the people that say they're not doing this, or they're not letting their athletes doing this, the fuck they are. You can just watch videos of their athletes and see this is a fucking mess, because it's just a boom, dropping down in. And if they can't control that, then get them the fuck off of the box. Go to goblet squats or go to something else that they're going to be able to build the strength up onto to be able to control what that is. All right. So when would you put in? So that's how you kind of wave in the squatting to a box. And if you're squatting to a box, keep in mind that whatever the free squat form is needs to be as closely mimicked to the squatting to a box is that, right? So that's the biggest mistake people make there is when I'll hear, I tried box squats, but they didn't work, which is, there's no context with that. So you don't even know what that even means. But a lot of the times it's that, because when they think they're squatting to the box, they're doing a box squat. So they're going wide, they're sitting way back, they're working their posterior chain. Then they go back to their regular squat stance, which is going to be a little bit closer. They're sitting down more than they're sitting back, and there's no correspondence or very little correspondence. Well, no shit, that you're not supposed to do that. That aside, if we look at the box squat where it is wide and you are sitting back, how would you put that into the program? That's where you get into the geared and equipped stuff, because that's how most geared lifters are going to lift, is going to be wider. They're going to sit back. So then when they're doing that box squat, that does closely mimic what the box squat is, right? So that's where that falls in. So they can rotate it in way more frequently, because the only real difference between how their technique is when they're on a box and when they're not on the box is the box. That's really the only thing. And so that can go back in. So if it's somebody that is not that, when would they put in the box squat to work the posterior chain? Whenever the posterior chain shows up as being one of the weak points in the lift or in the deadlift or what it's going to be. So how do you know when that is? Good question. Usually it's going to be lack of control before they get to the bottom of the squat, so they sit down fairly well, sit down, then it starts to lose control. And that bottom half of the eccentric point, not in all cases, but in most cases, I'm going to default there and say, this is glute hamstring. We got to be able to strengthen that up. So then we can put in the box squat as an accessory movement or a supplemental movement that can be, it can be the main, it can be the dynamic movement for the next 3 weeks, as long as the main max effort day or whatever you want to call that is that normal form. It can go in there for that 3-week wave, or it can just go in as a supplemental exercise. That would be the second movement of the day. And I don't know if I'd put it down as the accessory movement, but with that, I would bring the box up, because they're going to move their stance way out. So when you're dealing with box heights, I keep it simple. You got a high box, you got a standard box, and you got a low box. So with our box squat box, not the steel one, but the foam one that we have, there's 3 heights. There's a 17, there's a 17, 14, is that right? 17, 14, and 12. The 12 is low, the 17's high, the 14 standard. Obviously it's going to depend upon somebody's limb length and their height and all that, but just across the board, that's what it is. So when you're putting that in there and you're taking somebody to a box squat, they're probably not going to have the mobility or the flexibility. So you're going to start them on the high box, have them sit back. If that's way too easy, then you can take them to that medium box. Probably aren't going to take them down to the low box. The low box is going to serve more for closer stance work. If somebody's deadlift sucks, then you can take the safety squat bar, close stance, low box. That's going to, on the way down, it's going to tend to want to push them forward. So they have to keep their back and their lats packed to be able to bring that bar back up. So that would be where you would put in the close stance box. Squatting to a box would go into there. I'm just rambling through shit here. Cons, spinal compression. Doesn't transfer to a free squat. I covered that one. Removes the stretch reflex, which you actually need. A contentious debate point there. If you only pause it on if you only pause it on the box for a split second, then coming back up, I don't know how much that's really going to matter. We'll just leave that one aside. Yes and no. Only works for the geared multi-ply lifters, which is the number one thing that kind of comes out there. And it encourages a lazy bottom position. Yes and no. It's a lazy position if they're not keeping their body positioning there, because one of the things that the box can do is to help teach the correct body positions throughout that movement with less effort, where that pause is going to have, if you just did pauses, that's going to have more effort because it's kind of a quasi isometric as you're holding that pause through there. So if they're just sitting and not paying attention, yes, you can have that lazy position in the bottom for sure. But if the lazy position is going to be there in the bottom on a box, it is going to be there in the free squat for sure.